If you're a green card holder who travels internationally, listen very carefully, because what I'm about to tell you could determine whether you make it back into the United States or get stopped at the airport and questioned for hours. A massive change is happening right now at American airports that most permanent residents have no idea about. And immigration attorneys across the country are sounding the alarm. This isn't a proposal. This isn't something coming next year. This is already being rolled out at major US airports. And if you don't know what's happening, your next trip abroad could turn into an absolute nightmare. The Department of Homeland Security has quietly expanded biometric screening requirements for all travelers entering the United States, and green card holders are being caught completely off guard. We're talking about facial recognition scans, fingerprint verification, and iris scanning technology that's now mandatory at Customs and Border Protection checkpoints nationwide. For years, US citizens could opt out of facial recognition. They still technically can. But green card holders, you have no choice. You must comply. And if something goes wrong with the system, if your biometrics don't match what's in the database, if there's any discrepancy at all, you could be pulled into secondary inspection, where officers have almost unlimited authority to question you, search your belongings, and even revoke your permanent resident status on the spot. This started rolling out in late 2025, but it accelerated dramatically in the first months of 2026. Customs and Border Protection calls it a security enhancement. They say it's necessary to prevent fraud and identity theft. They claim it makes the entry process faster and more efficient. But immigration advocates are calling it something very different. They're calling it a surveillance dragnet that treats lawful permanent residents like criminal suspects. They're warning that the technology is far from perfect and that false rejections are happening every single day at airports across America. Here's what's actually happening when you land at a US airport as a green card holder. You walk up to the customs checkpoint, an officer directs you to a biometric kiosk. The machine scans your face. It takes your fingerprints. At some airports, it scans your iris. All of this data gets run through multiple government databases in real time. The system checks for any criminal records, any immigration violations, any national security flags, any unpaid taxes, any connection to anyone on a watch list. And here's the terrifying part. The algorithms making these decisions are not transparent. Nobody outside of Homeland Security knows exactly what triggers a red flag. Nobody knows how accurate the facial recognition technology really is under real-world conditions. What we do know is this. Facial recognition technology has documented accuracy problems, especially with people of color, especially with women, especially with older adults, and especially under poor lighting conditions, which describes most airport terminals perfectly. Studies have shown error rates as high as 35% for certain demographic groups. That means if you're a green card holder from Asia, Africa, Latin America, or the Middle East, there's a real chance the system could misidentify you. And when that happens, you don't just get waved through. You get pulled aside, your documents get confiscated, officers start asking questions. Where have you been? Who did you meet? Why were you gone so long? What's in your phone? And yes, they can search your phone. They can go through your messages, your photos, your emails, everything. Immigration attorneys are reporting cases where green card holders who've lived in America for 10, 15, 20 years are being held for 4, 5, 6 hours at the airport because the biometric system flagged them incorrectly. These are people with clean records, people who pay taxes, people who own homes and run businesses and have American children. But none of that matters when the computer says there's a problem. The burden of proof shifts entirely onto you. You have to prove you are who you say you are. You have to prove you haven't violated any immigration laws. You have to prove you deserve to enter the country where you legally live. And it gets worse. Customs and Border Protection officers have something called expedited removal authority. That means if they believe you obtained your green card fraudulently, if they think you abandoned your permanent residence, if they suspect you of any immigration violation, They can cancel your green card immediately, without a hearing, without a lawyer, without any real due process. You don't get to see a judge. You don't get to present evidence. The officer makes the decision right there at the airport, and suddenly, you're not a legal permanent resident anymore. You're in detention, waiting to be deported. Now, Homeland Security will tell you this almost never happens. They'll say these are extreme cases involving people who actually committed fraud or violated the law. But immigration rights organizations have documented hundreds of cases where long-time green card holders were wrongfully detained, questioned, and threatened with deportation based on biometric system errors or officer misconceptions about immigration law. One case that's gotten attention involves a green card holder from India who'd been living in California for 18 years. He went to visit his aging parents in Delhi. When he came back through San Francisco International Airport, the facial recognition system flagged a mismatch. Officers pulled him into secondary inspection. They questioned him for 7 hours. They accused him of using a fraudulent document. They threatened to revoke his green card. It took his attorney making emergency calls and producing mountains of documentation before they finally let him enter the country. This man did absolutely nothing wrong. He's a software engineer. He pays 6 figures in taxes every year. But the system treated him like a criminal. What makes this even more concerning is that Homeland Security is now sharing this biometric data with other agencies. Your facial scan, your fingerprints, everything collected at the airport is going into massive databases that can be accessed by ICE, by the FBI, by state and local law enforcement in some cases. Privacy advocates are horrified. They point out that green card holders never consented to this level of surveillance. When people applied for permanent residence, biometric collection was limited to the application process. Nobody told them that every time they travel, their face and fingerprints would be scanned and stored and analyzed by artificial intelligence systems with unknown accuracy rates. The legal justification Homeland Security is using comes from a 2017 executive order and subsequent regulations that broadly authorize biometric screening for national security purposes. But here's the problem. Those regulations were written vaguely. They don't clearly define what happens when the technology fails. They don't establish accountability when officers make mistakes. They don't provide meaningful appeal processes for people who are wrongly flagged. It's a system with enormous power and very little oversight. Congressional Democrats have started asking questions. Some representatives have called for hearings on the accuracy and fairness of airport biometric screening. They want to know why US citizens can opt out, but green card holders cannot. They want independent audits of the facial recognition technology. They want data on how many people are being wrongly detained and for how long. But so far, Homeland Security has resisted providing detailed information. They claim operational security concerns. They say revealing too much about how the system works could help people defeat it. Meanwhile, immigration attorneys are advising their green card holder clients to take precautions before traveling. They're saying, keep copies of all your immigration documents in multiple places. Make sure you have your attorney's contact information readily available. Don't leave the United States for extended periods, because that could raise abandonment questions. Be prepared to explain every trip. Keep evidence of your ties to America, your job, your home, your family. And if you get pulled into secondary inspection, be polite, but understand you have very limited rights in that situation. What does this mean for the millions of green card holders living in America? It means the freedom to travel internationally, something most people consider fundamental, now comes with serious risk. It means every time you visit family abroad, every time you take a business trip, every time you go on vacation outside the United States, you're subjecting yourself to surveillance technology that may or may not work correctly, and to officers who have almost unchecked authority to make life-changing decisions about your immigration status. Some immigrants are responding by simply not traveling. They're skipping family weddings, they're missing funerals, they're avoiding business opportunities. Because they're afraid. They're afraid that one computer glitch, one algorithmic error, one overzealous officer could destroy everything they've built in America. And can you really blame them? When you've invested years or decades establishing a life here, when you have children in American schools and a mortgage and a career, why would you risk it all on a system that treats you with suspicion every time you cross the border? The broader implications are chilling. This represents a fundamental shift in how America treats lawful permanent residents. For generations, a green card meant you were basically American except you couldn't vote. You had almost all the same rights as citizens. You could live and work freely. You could travel. You were trusted. But this new system sends a very different message. It says you're not fully trusted. It says you need to be monitored. It says your identity needs to be verified every single time you enter the country, as if your green card itself isn't proof enough. Civil liberties organizations warn this is part of a larger trend toward turning the United States into a surveillance state, where everyone's movements and identities are constantly tracked and analyzed by government computers. They point out that what starts with green card holders at airports never stays limited to that. The technology expands. The databases grow. Eventually, it affects everyone. We've already seen facial recognition creep into domestic airports, into stadiums, into public spaces. The infrastructure of mass surveillance is being built piece by piece, and most Americans have no idea it's happening. For green card holders specifically, the advice right now is stay informed and stay prepared. Understand that the rules have changed. Understand that traveling internationally carries new risks. Make sure your immigration status is rock solid. Make sure you can prove continuous residence. Make sure you haven't done anything that could even remotely be interpreted as abandoning your permanent residence or violating immigration law. And if you do get detained at the airport, remember that you can request to speak with an attorney, although officers are not required to provide one, and they often won't wait. This is the new reality at American airports. Biometric screening that's mandatory for green card holders, artificial intelligence making split-second decisions about who gets in and who doesn't, and almost no transparency about how any of it works. For millions of permanent residents who thought they had finally achieved security and stability in America, this is a wake-up call. Your status is more fragile than you realized. Your rights are more limited than you thought. And one bad airport experience could change everything. The technology is already deployed. The systems are already running. And whether you knew about it or not, you're already in the database.